Welcome to the Side Hustle to Small Business podcast powered by Hiscox. I'm your host, Sanjay Parekh. Throughout my career, I've had side hustles, some of which have turned into real businesses. But first and foremost, I'm a serial technology entrepreneur. In the creator space, we hear plenty of advice on how to hustle harder and why you can sleep when you're dead. On this show, we ask new questions in hopes of getting new answers. Questions like, how can small businesses work smarter? How do you achieve balance between work and family? How can we redefine success in our businesses so that we don't burn out after year 3? Every week, I sit down with business founders at various stages of their side hustle to small business journey. These entrepreneurs are pushing the envelope while keeping their values. Keep listening for conversation, context, and camaraderie. Derrick Knudsen was working at a Fortune 500 recruitment firm in Denver, Colorado, when he recognized the gap in the industry. Traditional firms were hesitant to help fill open positions at cannabis companies. In response, Derrick created a boutique recruitment firm, Meta Talent Group, which helps fill roles at cannabis, hemp, and psychedelic-focused companies. On today's episode, Derrick and I talk about finding the right talent, founding a company with family members, and overcoming the stigma of an emerging industry. Derrick, so excited to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for your time today, Sanjay. I'm excited to be here.
So, okay, let's start out. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me your background, like where you're from, where did you grow up, like all of those things about you.
Yeah. I'm originally from New York. Grew up the youngest of 6 and graduated from Syracuse University. Moved out to Denver, Colorado, just about 6-7 years ago. And that was really to break into the cannabis industry. And so, I've been out here for a number of years, really kind of building up, Meta Talent, my boutique cannabis and alternative health recruitment firm, as well as working on the nonprofit side with some folks here in Denver.
Yeah. So, so before starting these companies, what did you do anything entrepreneurial? Did you just have jobs? Where'd you go to school? Like, where's your base?
So my degree was environmental biology. I was a summer camp director, both in New York and in Colorado when I first got out here. And so, really thought that outdoor, ecological science education, was going to be my future. The nonprofit world, at that time and the organization, I felt like there was just a ton of red tape and some barriers. And so wanted the opportunity to step into the for-profit, entrepreneurial space, to try to build some personal wealth and then hopefully, open a nonprofit, which ended up coming a little bit sooner than I thought.
So let's talk about the nonprofit for a second. So you went, you saw the issues that we were having with COVID, and kind of like, what was your thought process of like, hey, I should do something to support here? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, I feel like so much has happened the past year or two. And I think, everyone at some point has said, what can I do to help, right? I mean, there's been folks struggling. And so I had a good friend here approach me really, back in May, June of 2020, and really kind of just pitched this idea of supporting small business owners and doing it in a way that really helps bring them to, the current digital age, in terms of websites and online ordering platforms, et cetera, et cetera. And, we sat down for our first meeting and, I was immediately, interested and, basically said, where do we start? Or, where do we go from here? And so, we've been building that for the last 2 years and, supporting small business owners, here in Denver. And we started, specifically in food and beverage just because of, how bad, food and beverage and hospitality in general were hit through the pandemic. So wanted to support the folks that, needed a little bit of that additional support.
Yeah. Okay. So alongside of that, you started up Meta, and Meta is, the goal is the cannabis and psychedelic industry, like helping with recruiting there. Like, why do you think that's a place to work in for you? Like, what's the challenge? What was the issue that you were seeing, and why has somebody else not kind of filled that gap?
Yeah, I think, you look at it now, there's definitely a number of recruitment firms in the space. For myself, I was working for a Fortune 500 executive recruitment firm in downtown Denver. that was very large and risk averse. And so when cannabis and hemp companies were approaching us for help, there wasn't an ability to work with them under that umbrella. Back in New York, I had tried some side hustle, businesses in terms of tutoring companies and different things of that nature. But that was the first time I thought that I had an idea that I could go in full force and then, turning a side hustle into, an entrepreneurial venture. And so, I did that in 2018 and, have been building up, towards that since then.
So what I'm hearing is you decided to be an entrepreneur, and as difficult as that is, you also decided to go into an industry where it's already difficult because not all the stuff is there. So you basically took it as a double whammy of I'm just going to make this as hard as possible on myself to be successful. Is that what we're talking about here?
I think so. I think, doing it also at the height of the pandemic and kicking things off. Let's
just add a third one on there, like a pandemic. Yep. And let's see what else we can pile on to make it harder for you to be successful.
For sure. But if you can make it when the roads are hardest, you're going to be super successful as as the roads get easier. So, that's the mentality. And more than just our services, we're passionate about the industry. Coming from New York and seeing the opioid crisis firsthand, wanting there to be alternative options. I mean, even when you look at, CBD and what it's done for, children with epilepsy. I mean, there's just a lot of research and development, a lot that can come out. And, that's, I think, what all of us want to push forward. Sure, there's a recreational component, but the research and development around what this could do, physically and mentally for us, especially as we dive into the psychedelic world. So it's an exciting space and one, that we're in full support of and, want to see it grow with the right people in place. And so, bringing our corporate and professional backgrounds into these nascent industries to help them grow the right way, is what we set out to do in starting MetaTalent.
Okay, so let's talk about you getting started with this, right? So you left the corporate gig, corporate recruiting, you put out your shingle. How'd you go out and get your first client and your first placement? Like, how did you get that all? Because this is kind of almost a chicken and egg problem, right? Because do you go get the people that need people placed, but then you don't have any people yet? Or do you get the people that need jobs and then go find, how did you figure this bit of it out?
Full desk recruiting is always a bit of the chicken and the egg. You're always trying to build, a pipeline and relationships with great candidates that are already in the space or interested to get into it and transition their skill sets. And then you're always looking for great partners, to work with. I think for us, we're highly focused on finding sustainable partners, B corporations, ESG corps, companies that are thinking about sustainable growth from a people, planet, and profitability perspective. And so, finding the first client wasn't easy. But I think when you're in this space, you quickly learn that relationships and referrals go a very long way. And so our first business came through a referral, a candidate that we spoke to that had a mentor, and they were working as a consultant in the space and needed to hire for a VP of operations. And we stepped in and filled that role.
Okay. So you really had the benefit of having been in the industry, even if it wasn't this industry, in the industry for a while and having built up those relationships. That's really the kind of secret sauce, the key to kicking this off.
And I think, being in a legacy market, right? Colorado just being one of the first. So doing it in Denver made it a bit easier. My brother, my partner in San Francisco, California, another legacy market. So in that first year, a lot of our business was Colorado and California. We've come a long way since 2018, but
So, okay, you alluded to this, and let's talk about this for a little bit. Your co-founder in this business is your brother, which not unusual. There's a lot of people that do, start companies with family, but it definitely adds a different wrinkle into all of this, right? Like, if things aren't going well, you're still going to see them at Thanksgiving dinner or whatever, right? Yeah. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, it was a fair bit of vetting, a lot of conversations back and forth. We've always got along very well, but obviously starting a venture, a business together is very different than playing on the same basketball team, right? And so, I think through those conversations, I had approached him and brought up the idea. This is what I want to do, looking for capital and trying to find interested parties. Would this be something you're interested in? And then, I think, a little bit of luck came through. A couple months after that, he had, been lucky enough to win a big fantasy football tournament. And so that was actually the capital that got us started. And then from there, it was like, hey, let's do this. Let's put it together. And, we've been riding that since, the last 4 or 5 years and building this together. So, it was kind of serendipitous, to a point, and I wouldn't take back any of it. And, he's been a great partner all along.
I was not expecting a fantasy football windfall to be what you said about how this all got started.
Yeah.
But that is
just a gritty, family, hungry family from New York. Like I said, one of 6, and didn't have a lot growing up. And, that was kind of the golden egg that, really kicked off all of his ventures. And, one of them being with myself here with Meta.
Yeah. So, okay, let's switch back to kind of the recruiting side of it, and kind of the industry you're in. Are you looking for something different in people that you're recruiting for this industry and for your clients than you did when you were kind of the regular corporate recruiter? Like, is there a skill set? Or is there a mentality? Like, what is different about the people that you're looking to recruit and bring into companies?
Yeah, definitely. I think, as an individual, I've always approached it kind of from a culture first mentality. And so really, talking with our partners and understanding, what the office environment is like and, the culture that they're looking to build. But I think when you look at specifically at cannabis, you're trying to find some of that passion, right? And if it's not passion for the plan and the industry, it's passion for startups and exciting environments that are growing and changing every day. And so, I think between those two avenues, that's a great way to kind of filter it out. Looking for passionate folks, who either really enjoy, wearing many hats and stepping into a startup environment that, is still forming and still developing, or, the passion for the plan, alternative healthcare, alternative medicine, and what that can do for folks.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, starting a new company, starting a startup, even though you had experience in this industry before, recruiting that is always difficult. There's always challenges. So like, what are the challenges that you've faced? And I know you're still kind of early on, right? It's only been a few years that you've been doing this, but there's all these challenges. And a lot of times people will overblow those kind of challenges and be the reason why they think that they can't start a company like you've done. So tell us about some of those challenges that you faced and kind of how did you deal with them and how did you get over them?
Yeah, I think, number one is probably stigma, right? 10 years ago, we wouldn't even be sitting here having this conversation, right? It just wouldn't be happening.
That's true.
And so I think even for myself, I've 4 or 5 of my family members back in New York, are cops, right? And just come from that kind of legal side and that law enforcement side of the house. And, when I said that, starting a company in cannabis almost immediately became the black sheep, right? And so, I think that stigma is number one. Even in terms of looking for candidates on LinkedIn and people being nervous to even talk about being interested in these areas, right? And so using Boolean search and keywords and, that really does, kind of inhibit, the pool of candidates that you can get in touch with because they're nervous to put that information out there, right? So often early on in 18 and 19, even for corporate professionals that were very passionate, again, about the space, said, well, I've heard if I get in, I'm not going to be accepted back into the corporate world, right? Because now I've got cannabis on my resume. And I just don't know how, favorable that's going to look to other employers, that are in more traditional and corporate industries. And so I think a lot of it was just kind of breaking through that stigma. And I think we're facing the same things with the psychedelic health industries now, right? I think people are becoming a bit more open just to talking about mental health and PTSD and trauma and, anxiety and depression, especially with everything that's happened the last year or two. But it's really working through the stigmas, that's most difficult.
Okay, so let's talk about like kind of like the nuts and bolts of actually running a company like this. There's a lot to do when you start, right? And a lot of people don't understand this because we just see the very nice stories that happen at the end, right? And they don't write the stories about what happens between the beginning and the fancy ending. But like what are some things that you're using, tools, techniques, things like that to help you run the business and make it so that you're able to manage all of the stuff that's going on? What do you have for us?
Yeah, definitely. So, a couple of, key tools that we use, as recruiters and in the space. You have to have a great CRM, ATS, applicant tracking system. So we use Bullhorn, top of the line, and we went back and forth with some smaller, more affordable platforms. And, at the end of the day, just thought in terms of scaling and really growing the business, we want to set ourselves up right from the beginning. Zoom Info, great business to business, contact tool. So just reaching out to executives in the space and, getting them some of the resources that we put out there in terms of salary guides and our national internship program for the space. And then of course, LinkedIn Recruiter, any executive recruiter is going to be on LinkedIn Recruiter and, have the ability to use thousands of different search filters to really narrow down, the right fit for that particular role in that particular company. So I think, those three are really big. But again, like I said, with it being such a nascent space, referrals and relationships, that does go a long way. And so, but yeah, those are three of the big ones for us.
Okay. And so let's give some advice to listeners that potentially might want to get into the industry. What would you tell them that they should do? Like they're not in any of these industries right now, but they want to move in, right? And we talked about it a little bit before of like worrying about the stigma and what should they say and should not say, on a LinkedIn or whatever. Like what advice would you have for them to be able to be seen and known in the industry other than, like obviously they could reach out to you and say like, raise their hand and say, hey, I'm interested, but what else could they do?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things you can do. And, obviously, switching industries, changing jobs, that's a big step for anyone. So when you talk about it, in industries like these, it's even that more pronounced. And so, I think reading up and doing your due diligence just on companies. And, I think it starts with the why. Why do you want to be in the space, right? And so that's the first question you ask yourself. And you really understand your kind of motives, for being in the space. Like I said, it could be passion for the plan. It could be passion just for startup environments and, hyper growth industries, right? And so, there's a couple different ways you can take it, but the first question is why? And then, I think that inevitably, if that answer is yes, and it's confident, then you're moving to how. And, a lot of that can be connecting, with an executive recruiter, a recruitment firm like ours, and even just having a conversation to understand the landscape, even before looking at a particular position. Like we said earlier, how do you overcome the stigma? Well, it's just having conversations and just continuing to be open and transparent, about what you're looking for. And so, I think a lot of it, just comes down to the motivation to want to learn about the space, what's happening there, and how they can be, a puzzle piece in the bigger system.
Yeah. So what's interesting in what you said there is making a bunch of money was not one of the good reasons as to why you want to move into this, right? And I think that's true for most jobs. That shouldn't be your motivation in terms of your perspective, I take it.
Yeah, it's part of it. I'd be lying if it wasn't, right? We work people, planet, and profitability, right? And we want all three of those to grow, equally. And so, profitability, making money leads to, increased job availability. And so there's a lot of great things that come from that. So we're not afraid of making money, but we're not going to let that outweigh, our core principles and why we entered the space. So, it's an equal component, but doesn't outweigh, the other pieces of what we're trying to do here.
So the successful recruit, somebody that wants to work in this industry, that's not their main motivation. I mean, obviously, look, we all have to get paid. We have bills and we got to live life. But from your perspective, that's not the main thing that drives a successful candidate getting placed into these companies.
No, I don't think so. Although, there's not too many industries that offer up as much equity as you'll see in this area, just because, again, it's so new, right? So there is upside and, a light at the end of the tunnel, but that's also not going to be realized in your first couple of years. And so I think it's just a balance, like most things, knowing that because the industry is growing so quickly and when it does go federally legal, there's going to be more capital availability, more profitability. And so it'll get there. And I think the right folks kind of understand that it's not today, but it'll get there. It's, as long as you continue to stay in the space.
Yeah. Okay. So I got one last one for you, Derrick. Listeners that might be teetering on the edge of either starting a side hustle or starting, going all in and starting a business. What would your one piece of advice be to them, and maybe a piece of advice of something that they should do, and maybe a piece of advice of something that they shouldn't do, and make sure they avoid? What would you say to them?
Yeah. So, something that they definitely should do is think about it for quite some time. It's not easy. You know that. I know that. You're doing everything, right? And so when you're expected to keep your inbox clean on top of, sending out paychecks and invoices and, collecting and doing the day-to-day recruitment of a position. I mean, when you're first starting out, if it is a side hustle to a business and, you're really shoestringing it, it's going to be a struggle, it's a bit of a roller coaster, right? I mean, you're going to have great days and you're going to have not so great days. And so I think a lot of it is, just kind of understanding where you are in your life, who depends on you, right? For me, just, being, a single person, that I feel like that made it easier, just not having dependents and a family, and so, there's a lot of ups and downs. Just know kind of your footing, your foundation, and why, you want to do it. In terms of what you shouldn't do, friends and family are tough. It's worked for us, and my brother and I, we've made it work. But it's something to take into consideration. And when you're starting a business, your first one or two hires are just so important, right? I mean, when the cost of a bad hire is already 2.5 to 3 times salary. But when you're talking about it, when you're starting a 2-person company and you're making hires 3 and 4, I mean, you almost need those to be successful. And so really taking your time and vetting out your first couple of hires is super critical.
Yeah. Awesome. Derrick, thanks so much for being on the podcast. This is fascinating. I learned a lot. And I look forward to seeing how you and Meta grow over the time coming up.
Thank you, Sanjay. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Side Hustle to Small Business podcast, powered by Hiscox. To learn more about how Hiscox can help protect your small business through intelligent insurance solutions, visit hiscox.com. That's HISCOX.com. And if you have a story you want to hear on this podcast, please visit hiscox.com/share your story. I'm your host, Sanjay Parekh. You can find me on Twitter at Sanjay, that's SANJAY, or on my website at sanjayparekh.com.